right, we are live with one of my favorite comic artists, Atlanta local, June Brigman. You have seen her work everywhere. If you look online at her credits, it is a who's who and what's what of just awesomeness. June, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
So how have you been doing? How is the great weirdness, as we've been calling it?
It's weird. It is weird, isn't it? I have to say the weirdest thing about my life right now is how relatively normal it is. You know, like a lot of other troglodytes have been saying, I've been preparing my whole life for this. So, I mean, but we're really, really fortunate. I mean, we have a roof over our heads, we have work, we have food. More importantly, our cats have food. So, you know, it's all good so far for us.
Good. And how is? I know right now you're actively doing you're doing Mary Worth and you're doing your creator-owned Captain Ginger. Are you still actively working on both of those?
Oh yes, I am. I have to admit I kind of get a kick out of my friends who are like, I'm so bored. I don't know what to do with myself. Oh my God. And I'm like, I'm just sitting here. I'm really, like I said, I'm very fortunate that I'm still sitting in my little room with a cat in my lap, drawing my little pictures, still working on Mary Worth. Thank God. And still working on Captain Ginger. Yeah.
So before I gave you a call, I was looking at your body of work, and it really is. You have had your pencil on everything. How did you break into the industry? What is your story? And why?
Why? Yeah, why? Why did I want to sit at a drawing board, you know, day in, day out? I knew I wanted to be an artist. I knew that I wanted to be a working artist, you know, actually get paid for what I love to do. And I was at University of Georgia. I was, you know, an art major, and my boyfriend, who is now my husband and partner in crime, Roy Richardson, we worked together. He turned me on to comics. I did not read comics as a child. I just didn't really know about them.
Mm-hmm.
I always drew. I was always like the girl who drew horses. And I was an art major. I really wasn't sure what direction I wanted to go in. And he turned me on to comic books. He started showing me some of his comic book collection, turned me on to Jack Kirby's Fourth World. I think that was what really drew me in. There was one issue in particular with Bug, and that this whole kind of operatic world that he created, I just was drawn to that. And then Roy took me to a comic book convention here in Atlanta. I think it was the Atlanta Fantasy Fair. And that was when it was very comic book centric. You know, it was all about comic books and comic book creators. And there were some amazing people there. I met Bernie Wrightson. I met Michael Kaluta. I met Gil Kane. I met Bob McLeod, Joe Rubenstein. And I sat there that day just watching them work. And especially Gil Kane. I think I spent most of my day sitting there watching Gil Kane work. And I thought, wow, this looks like a lot of fun. Looks like a lot more fun than going into advertising or illustration. I had always loved to draw. And comic books is a very drawing-oriented field. And that did it for me. Then I decided to start concentrating on that, working up a portfolio, dropped out of school. My parents were right. I did regret it.
Parents were excited when you did that.
My parents were not thrilled. They basically wanted me to get a degree in art, paint some pretty paintings of old barns and stuff, and maybe become a stewardess and marry a pilot, you know. Yeah. Becoming a comic book artist was not part of their life plan for me. But yeah, I worked up a portfolio, got some work for this little comic book company in Florida, AC Comics. A lot of people kind of got their start with them. Jerry Ordway was one.
Oh, wow.
So I had something printed in hand. And then I did a job for DC's New Talent book. And the writer I worked with, Steve Ringenberg, was working at Marvel at the time, and he got me in the door. And you could do that back then. If you knew somebody, they could get you in the door, and you could just walk around the office, which I did, and went to door to different editors, knocking on their door, showing my stuff. Larry Hama gave me a little backup job in Savage Sword of Conan. And then I met Louise Simonson, and she was an editor, and she didn't have anything for me at the time, but she asked if I knew how to draw children. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So you're right. I mean, the two of you went on to create Power Pack together, and that's one thing that has always struck me about your work is not only can you draw children, but you draw children that look like children. And I feel like that's something that a lot of artists they will struggle with. Why don't you struggle with that? How did you find it easy to do or able to do when others couldn't?
Well, I struggled with drawing pretty much everything when I first started out. I really was thrown into the deep end, had no idea what I was doing. But I was better at drawing children than the big, beefy, muscular superhero types. That was hard for me. But I've often told my students this, it was that I could do something that I was decent at that other people weren't, that gave me my start. I could do something that was a little different. And that was my advantage. And I was just lucky that I was in the right place at the right time and met Louise, and she was looking for somebody who could do this. There were amazing artists, just incredible artists working at this time. This is like 1983, 84. But none of them were really interested in drawing children. So that was my end.
I know at the time when you got your in comics, if you look at the names, there aren't a lot of women who are listed on that list. You have Louise Simonson. I always butcher her name, and Nascenti.
Yeah.
And then there's June Brigman, which I feel like that's the triumvirate of female creators at the time.
Well, there was Mary Wilshire.
Okay, yep.
And there was Jan Duursema. But yeah, there weren't very many. There were women on staff.
Mm-hmm.
There's Joe Duffy. There's Louise Simonson, Ann Nascenti. I'm sure I'm missing some names. There were colorists. Glennis Ween, who colored Power Pack. There were several different really good female colors working at the time, just not a lot of women pencilers. And I'm often asked about that. How did I struggle to break through all the sexism, yada, yada. And I think sometimes people are disappointed in my story. It was a different time. You didn't have social media. You didn't have Twitter. And if there weren't very many women in the business, I feel like it was because not very many women were really interested in it.
Gotcha.
A lot has changed in the business because of anime and manga, I think, has really gotten a lot of young women interested in comics that they just weren't interested in drawing superhero books. They weren't interested in reading them. They weren't interested in drawing them. So I honestly, once I got started, I had a lot of support, and I didn't have a problem with getting work because I was a woman. I mean, there were certain books that probably I didn't get not so much because I was a woman, but because of the style I drew in. I didn't drawing that really dynamic superhero style. It took me a long time to get that kind of dynamic energy into my work. So I always felt welcomed into the industry. I did not have to break through a glass ceiling. I did not feel like there was any kind of sexism or bias towards me, but that's my story. Everyone has a different story. And as I said, that was a very different time.
Well, I know you said that other people are disappointed to hear that. I am relieved to hear that and happy to hear that. So that's fantastic.
I think just sometimes in the age of Me Too, they want to hear a hardship story, and I don't really have one.
I'm glad you don't. So
I am too.
well, you mentioned your style. So who are your stylistic influences? Because your style at the time and still, it was not that bombastic. It was very unique. So what were your stylistic influences? Who were your stylistic influences?
Well, I guess if, the people I would name, you're going to look at my work and you're going to be like, I don't see that. I guess I tried to maybe think the way they thought. Bernie Wrightson was certainly one. And I think every now and then in some of my early work, in some of the faces, you can see that. I looked at a lot of Gil Kane, and it was, like I said, it was really hard for me. I think because I didn't grow up looking at comics to get that dynamic quality in my work. So Gil Kane and Walt Simonson. I don't know if you can see over my shoulder, but I have, Walt will see them. The pieces to the left and the right are by Walt. These are pieces these are like color prints he did when he was in college.
Wow.
He gave to me. And the other one in the middle is a Howard Chaykin original.
I was going to ask, that looked like a Chaykin in the middle there.
It's Howard. I love that piece. We were carrying around for years before we finally got a house big enough to hang it up in. But yeah, I would say Walt and Gil Kane, Bernie Wrightson, Joe Kubert. Yeah, these are the people who are, and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez,
Yes.
who is my art god. Yeah. And we have originals by all these artists. Yeah, you gotta come to my house.
I need to see this stuff. Gosh. Yeah, I just got in the mail today the IDW Artist Edition of Bernie Wrightson. So tonight after the kids go to bed, that's what I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, we have that. We have that too. And he was such a lovely person. And in my sketchbook, he did a Swamp Thing for me. That's incredible.
We do have a question from Facebook. Did your early love of drawing horses, did that have an impact on the characters in Power Pack that have the horse features?
Well, actually, that's the character in Power Pack, the alien race, the Chimalians. That's based on a seahorse. A little more than seahorses look like, regular horses. But that was my inspiration. If you look at their snouts and the way their mane is done, it's actually a seahorse. Although their legs, since seahorses don't have legs, I kind of need to give them legs. And I didn't want them to walk around as regular people legs, so I did give them haunches like a horse would have. Yeah.
Now I am curious, why horses?
I was born one of those horse crazy girls.
Fair enough.
It was the first thing I learned to draw, and I was like in school, it was like, I'll get Jen to draw the horse for you. And it served me well. I mean, I tell myself, if you can learn to draw a horse, you can learn to draw almost any four-legged mammal. And I didn't have horses as a child, but as an adult, I made up for lost time, and I still ride. I ride twice a week. And it served me well. I did a How to Draw Horses book a few years ago, and for many years I did illustrations for Horse and Rider magazine. And that's why horses.
Well, Jamie is off camera right now, so a good social distance, pointing to herself, going, "Horse girl."
Oh, yeah. Now that I know that, we can talk about horses together.
There you go. We'll schedule a Zoom call between the two of you so you can talk about horses. One thing, from Power Pack, again, I encourage everybody, June is everywhere. But what fascinates me is that you then make the transition from comic books to comic strips.
Right.
Which, while there are similarities, it seems to me like an entirely different style of storytelling. Whereas a comic book, you typically have 22 pages. Comic strips, you've got 3 panels, maybe 4. So how did you get into the comic strip game?
It's funny, I got into comic strips kind of the same way I got into working for Marvel Comics. It was through Larry Hama.
Oh,
thank you, Larry. This was at a time, couldn't have come along at a better time, because it was in the mid 90s when the comic book business was imploding. And Larry Hama contacted me and said, hey, the artist on Brenda Starr is retiring. It was Ramona Fraden. She's retiring and they're looking for somebody. And I was like, okay. And I tried out and sent in some samples, and I got the job. And that was along with my husband Roy, who is my inker and letterer and colors of Sundays. And we ended up doing Brenda Starr for 15 years. And thank you, Larry Hama. It worked out. I think if it hadn't been for Brenda Starr at that time, we would have been like, moving into my mother's basement or something.
Was there a learning curve involved going from comic books to comic strips?
You have to learn how to deal with the limitations. A comic book page is kind of wide open. Yes, you have to tell a story. You have to work with a writer on the script, but you have this wide open, this large space. I work on 11 by 17 paper. The live area of a comic book page is about 10 by 15. And you can arrange the panels any way you want. The size of the panels can be anything you want as long as it serves a story. A comic strip, the format is set in stone. Mm-hmm. You have a set number of panels, and those panels are a set size, and you cannot vary it. You can't, because of the way newspapers print the strips. Sometimes they don't print the whole strip. They will drop the first 2 panels and they will rearrange the panels, and you cannot change the format because of that. So it is just a more limiting medium, and the challenge is dealing with those limitations, telling a story, making it interesting, entertaining yourself along the way within the limits of that medium.
Were you previously a fan of comic strips? Were there any that?
Well, I had read, as a child, we sit down with a Sunday paper, and I would sit there and, especially, eat my, Cheerios. And my favorite comic strips, I read Brenda Starr as a child, and I read The Phantom because he had a horse and a dog. So, that really appealed to me. Of course, I read Peanuts. I read Funky Winker Bean. I loved comic strips as a child. I never had any ambition toward being a comic strip artist. It really didn't occur to me. Doing a comic strip seemed like winning the lottery. It just seems so out of reach. I never thought about it.
Now, you mentioned the limitations of the comic strip. I've heard other creators talk about that, though, whether it's writing or art, though, the limitations can often bring out innovation and the best. Have you found that to be true, that the limitations can sometimes?
Yeah.
Or it is what it is?
Like I said, you find ways to say what you want to say, and you have to entertain yourself, because the thing about comic strips is they're different from comics in that you don't have a lot of closure. I mean, that's the good thing about them, is they go on and on, hopefully, and your paycheck goes on and on. That's the good part. But they are relentless, and you, in order to survive, you kind of have to find ways to entertain yourself as an artist, to make it interesting for you as an artist to keep doing this day in and day out. It requires a certain kind of artistic stamina that not everybody has.
So right now you've been doing Mary Worth for years now. How do you make something as long running? And again, Brenda Starr, same way. Brenda Starr was 40, right? She'd been around for a hot minute.
Yeah, she started in like 1939. Mary Worth started, I should know the exact year. I can't remember. It was in the 40s.
But it's been a while. So you come along to this thing that's been around a while. And you become the steward of it, basically.
Right.
How do you go about, at the same time, maintaining the character while at the same time making it your own?
Well, that's an interesting question. In both cases, when I took over Brenda Starr and Mary Worth, I was following there were some really hard acts to follow. I was following Ramona Fradon on Brenda Starr and Joe Giella on Mary Worth, and they were both incredible artists. And at first, I tried to kind of follow their style, but it's very difficult to copy a style like that. It's like trying to sign your name in somebody else's signature. And so I had to start doing my interpretation of both those characters. And at first, I got a lot of hate mail. The fans were like, "Oh my God, where's the twinkles in Brenda's eyes?" Or, "Oh my God." They call it fake Mary Worth. "You gave her a facelift. She was so young. What happened to that old lady we used to love?" And I finally explained to one fan of Mary Worth, I was like, "Well, I have friends who are in their 70s, which I picture Mary Worth as being in her 70s. And I'm like, they look great. 70 now looks very different than 70 did, 25, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. At least that's what I tell myself, I'm not that far behind. And eventually they got over it. They kind of learned to accept it, and okay, this is Mary Worth now. Yeah, you have to just kind of relax, and as long as they still know the characters, I had to do my interpretation, the way my style, all these characters.
We have another question just came in. How big is the Bible for Mary Worth?
There is no Bible.
There's no Bible.
If there is one, I never saw it.
And you just mentioned that you got some anger from fans. Any pushback from editors for the facelift and stylistic changes you made?
At first, they kept saying that Mary Worth wore her hair in a bun, and I was like, really? And I started looking back at Joe Giella's work, and I was like, I don't see a bun. The bun must have been a long time ago, and they kept saying, no, well, it's just not very obvious. And, Joe kept it well hidden. And finally, Joe, thank God, came to my rescue and said, I never drew with a bun.
Nice.
So, and for a while, there was a little pushback of, oh, you're making her too thin. You're making her too fat. You're making her too old. You're making her too young. And I set up myself with my own style guide, my own Bible. This is how she looks. This is it. Mm-hmm. And they finally accepted it.
Well, let's talk about your character now. Let's talk about Captain Ginger. Let's talk about this really cool book. So, little preface here. Captain Ginger was in the process of being published when our store was in the process of opening. And Captain Ginger, my partner Jamie is the one who does all the ordering. Captain Ginger was a book that she stocked from the beginning. What is the genesis of Captain? For those who don't know, it's space opera, and the protagonist is a cat. What is the genesis of that?
First of all, thank you for carrying Captain Ginger. I was so thrilled when I came into your store opening. I was like, oh my God, they got Captain Ginger. I love this place. Captain Ginger was the brainchild of the writer Stuart Moore. And Stuart and I had worked together for a comic book company called Tishkeel that published comics throughout the Middle East. They were based in Kuwait. And a story I had drawn for Stuart had the characters visiting a cat rescue place, and I was drawing cats. And so later when he came up with the idea for Captain Ginger, he's like, oh, yeah, I remember. June can draw cats. And I read the script and I loved it. I love the characters so much. And, we put together a proposal and Stuart, bless his heart, used his connections and shopped it around. And we got lots of nibbles, but no bites. And then Ahoy Comics came along and he presented it to them and they loved it and started, said, go make comics about cats in space. So that's what we've been doing for the past couple of years.
You seem to be enjoying it immensely.
Love it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was going to ask. I mean, have you? You're superheroes, obviously, but were you a pre-existing science fiction fan?
Oh yeah. I've always loved science fiction, and I've always loved. We give a lot of nods to Star Trek, the original series. I did an homage to The Trouble with Tribbles. There's a Captain Ginger cover that's a straight ripoff of Shatner with all the tribbles. Except this is all the kittens. I am a big science fiction fan. I love Heinlein. Well, I'm more old school. I love William Gibson, although I guess he's kind of old school now.
There's no school like the old school.
Yeah, and Andre Norton, and Stuart does too. And that's the thing about Captain Ginger. It's really good science fiction. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's science fiction that happens to have cats.
Yeah.
And cat characteristics. But there's a depth to the characters and the stories that goes beyond, I think what you might be expecting from this book.
Well, and as a reader, that's something I noticed almost immediately is that the writing is so great and the art is so great that the world that you've built together, totally immersed in it. Yeah, of course. I mean, sure, this is a good story. And yes, this is a cat, but this is fantastic. So this has got to be, correct me if I haven't done enough. Is this your first creator-owned work?
Well, it's the second. I'm a co-creator with Power Pack. And this is my second co-creation with the writer.
This is fantastic. Like I said, I am enjoying it. And, we carry the trades, and it's a really easy sell for parents looking for something, especially for young adult and kids who are they like science fiction.
Right.
Try Captain Ginger then. So, anecdotally, folks love it here.
Well, I really think it's an all ages book.
Absolutely.
It's kind of advanced, kind of like Star Trek is a little bit. I wouldn't say it's a little kid's book, not that it has sex and violence in it.
Not at all.
Although there is some slaughtering of rats in the first issue. But it's, I think it's an all ages book. And to me, that's the best kind of comic book. Power Pack was an all ages book, and so is this. I mean, your kids can enjoy it. You can enjoy it. You can pass it on to your kids. Yeah, it's great.
Well, June, we're coming up to the end of our 30 minutes together. Is there anything else that you wanted folks to know as far as what you're working on? Where can they find you?
I'm still doing Mary Worth, and we're gonna have some more issues of Captain Ginger coming out. Right now we're doing another season. The first season was 4 issues. We're doing 6 more as we speak. I'm working on the 5th of the 6 issues. So keep an eye out for it. It's going to be out there. And yeah, I love it. And I think you guys will too.
June, I love your work, but also I guess I love you as a person. You're just amazing on all levels. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it. I love your store. I love Infinite Realities. Guys, as soon as you can, get out there and go to the comic book store. It's great.
Well, we appreciate you. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. Everybody, thanks for joining us today. June Brigman.